With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to another amazing show that we've got a great host lined up for you. Now today is a bit different. My name is Nazia Kitun. I'll be taking place hosting a brilliant speaker today. Yeah. Welcome to SingleMuslim.com, sponsored by Single Muslim. With me, my name is Nazia Kitun. We are live on Sky Channel 752 and across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Wherever you're watching, a very welcome. You too can join us in tonight's discussion and get advice by simply calling through to the studio on 01924 231 083. Standard network rates apply. Please ensure you have the bill payer's permission before calling, or why not share your thoughts via WhatsApp in confidence by messaging on 079 507 977017. Today we are joined by Fahima, a social media influencer, and our topic is about, wait for it, challenges of interracial relationship. Fahima, welcome to the show. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, Nazia. How are you?
I am so well. Lovely to have you on our show today. Thank you so much for joining us. So today's topic is a very unique one, I must say, for the show. And I just want to say, first of all, it's an honor to have you on here, and we're going to be speaking about these things. And I'm actually quite excited to be diving in and getting your insight of your actual experience and just getting people's comments and everything in. So first, I just wanted to quickly ask you, how long have you been married for?
So actually, it's quite fitting. Today's actually my 3rd year anniversary.
Oh, alhamdulillah, congratulations. When did you celebrate that?
To be honest, because it's lockdown, we can't really do much at the moment. So today we just kind of got a nice Turkish restaurant takeaway and just chilled at home. But I had a lot of work meetings.
Oh, wow. And there you are. You're still giving us some time. So I really appreciate that. And thank you to your husband as well. Now, what does the word interracial mean to you, first of all? And how do you pertain it in your marriage?
I think in the most simplistic form, an interracial marriage is the kind of coming together of people from 2 different ethnicities or overall races, if you prefer. And I think in my relationship, it's more a blending of the 2 as well, aside from just the separation of him being English and myself being Bangladeshi.
Oh, beautiful. I mean, in our communities now, we've become very, I would say, a bit open in terms of interracial marriages. In your opinion, do you still feel like we have work to do when it comes to acceptance of other people from other cultures and backgrounds into the South Asian community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as far as we've come, there is definitely some work to do. I think some of the biggest issues lie more so in perhaps their perceived ethnicity of the person. For example, their fair skin, we often associate them with a westernized version of Islam. That's if they reverted. And more so if someone's Turkish or Arab might be a bit more welcome for the fact that we know Islam is part of their history and their culture.
Right.
And I think just in general, another factor to it would probably be the conversation between men and women. It's, I find from experience and from what I've seen, for men it tends to be a bit of an easier road, whereas for women there's a bit of criticism, and I think that stems from the modesty aspect of it, in the sense of you've gone and found your own person rather than parents approaching you for the talk.
How interesting. Do you think then, in your opinion, we've progressed, or there's a lot of work to be done maybe as the years go by and as the generations actually move forward as well?
I think we can't discredit the amount of progress we've made. Like, I think it is so much more common now, social media or just in real life, to see people from different backgrounds come together. But I think overall more progress can absolutely be made. I think, for example, marrying someone who's Black is still slightly, estranged to us in a sense. It's more common for it to be someone who's also maybe Asian or West Asian or someone who's English.
Nice. Where is your husband? What background is your husband from?
He's white English, so he's a northern lad.
Oh, but where did you guys meet?
So we met through actually a work friend, and when we first did meet up, it was in like a central London area because he used to live a bit further out of London at the time. So it wasn't like he was around the corner.
Oh, bless you. So I'm just going to ask you some questions. How did you guys initially meet? And then in terms of progressing and where you are, how did that evolve on the timeline?
So we met approximately about, I'd say, 4 years ago, and it's more so from a friend of mine. She's like, oh, he's got a couple of questions regarding religion. He's been surrounded by Muslims pretty much his whole life. And she's like, perhaps you could be answering them for him because, she's seen me answer it for a few other friends previously. So I was like, yeah, I'm absolutely happy to do that. And I organised a date with her. I was like, I'll meet him on this date. But what I didn't know at the time was he thought I was quite pretty as well. So when I met up with him that day, I made it abundantly clear to him. I was like, I am here to answer questions. I don't believe in marriage. I don't believe in love. I'm just here to answer your questions. And that is as far as it will go. And I think he kind of laughed in the sense of saying, perhaps you haven't experienced love yet to know that. But I think it was more kind of my place of, sometimes rejection in the past. So I didn't want to set myself up for that. And as time went on, I answered his questions, we spoke more, and it also became more friendly in the sense of like asking how his day was rather than, okay, what do you want me to answer today?
Yeah.
And then it got to a point where I got quite sick. I had a spinal disability and I was in hospital. I was very ill. And I let him know because I was speaking to him for that entire time. And then he just turned up at the hospital at 4 in the morning, traveled 100 miles a night. I thought, oh my goodness, this person only known me a few months, cares an extreme amount, and I can see he's got a genuine interest in Islam. Maybe I should actually consider this person as a man that I could potentially marry. He's always slightly introduced it into the conversation, like, oh, you'd be kind of nice to be with. You seem like a nice girl, but he was
Oh.
always so respectful with it. So I really appreciated that. But I think that was the point where I was like, okay, this is clearly going to go somewhere.
How old are you, Fahima?
I'm 25.
Wow. I mean, that is a good age to probably say settle down and everything. Did you feel like you were pressured maybe to marry? I mean, I'm Bangladeshi and you're Bangladeshi. Did you get the pressure to be married within our own culture? And how was that like for you?
I think there was generally a certain expectation that you would marry someone who's Bengali so you can continue the culture and the traditions. I think that pressure was there, but growing up, I think at some point I became quite assertive. And I was like, whoever I marry, whatever age it will be, it's not going to be based on the color of their skin or their ethnicity. It will be
Yeah.
based on character. And I think that was kind of more so what my family understood, but I don't think they really expected it to happen. So when it did happen, it turned out to
Yeah.
be someone who's got Bengali. I think it was still a massive shock for them. But yeah.
Wow. I think, my sister's married to a Colombian weaver, and
Oh
they've been
wow.
married, yeah, happily for like 3 years, and they've given us a beautiful nephew who's 1 year old. And she happened to be the second sister who got married. And even though my parents raised us very open-minded, very liberal, and we all studied, we're very out of the traditional stereotype Bangladeshi girls. When my sister brought my brother-in-law home, it was a big shock to them. And we have to differentiate between what religion says and what culture says. And that too can become very, very entangled, and it gets confusing for the elder generation, right?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
when you came to your parents, our Sasa and our Sasi, what were their initial reaction, first of all?
I think one thing to make clear is my family was separated. So I only had my mother, my older brother, and that kind of situation, a few siblings. So I think for my mom, when I told her, I was like, Mom, I think I found my future husband, and please don't be angry. He's white. And she was just like, yeah, I don't think that's gonna last. You'll get over it. I think her first reaction was to kind of dismiss it as a joke, but she just probably was like, oh God, here we go. And I let her know very clearly, I was like, he's not Muslim at the moment. He wants to be Muslim. So
Right.
that's something to bear in mind. So it was an even bigger shock. She was like, okay, so firstly, you're bringing someone who's not Bengali. And secondly, he's not even Muslim. And even if he did become Muslim, it would be very new. How do you know he's going to change his mind? So she tried to dismiss the letter. It was just like, yeah, I don't think this is going to happen.
Was it more so the religion aspect or the fact that he wasn't Bengali that bothered your mum more? Which one was it?
It was definitely the being Bengali. I think that was the big factor because,
Mm.
she's quite one of those people where she likes to understand like Reba. She's very much always passionate about making sure these people are very supported. But the one thing she kept bringing up more so than anything was the fact that he was a Bengali. She's like, he's not going to speak the language, he's not going to eat our food. What kind of wedding are you going to have? Who's going to be invited? And she had all of these concerns, and it was
Yeah.
just quite overflowing. And I was just like, what about the Muslim part? Are you not? And she's like, oh, yes, yes, I know. He also has to be Muslim, obviously. She's like, that's a given. So I don't know if that's why she didn't bring that up per se, but it just seemed to be focused of he's not Bengali, this is the impossible kind of situation.
I remember when my father questioned my sister. My brother's name is Dawood, and my father said, they're Colombians. They're notoriously, they have a very, very bad reputation. And it was really, really insightful to see our older generation, the parents, the misconceptions they have. If somebody's not Bengali or our own caste, it's like othering the other people, the other culture, the other community. They become a foreign individual, a foreign culture, a foreign everything. I get it. It's hard for them because they've never actually experienced it in their time,
Yeah,
and they've never had to go through it themselves. And they want
yeah,
their children to carry on that kind of lineage, their heritage. And I think that's what it boils down to, doesn't it? Their lineage and their heritage that we pass on throughout. How did you get around to explaining it to your mom, and how long did it take for her to actually accept him?
I think for her, I explained to her, I was like, Mom, I know you're probably concerned. Like, let's be honest, a lot of Bengalis, we perceive English people as like people, like, I don't know, promiscuous things, which clearly isn't always the case because you could argue that English people think of us as really bad and backwards. It's always like that. So I made sure I was like, look, mother, I'm not going to lose my culture. That just will not happen.
Mm.
Realistically, the first language I think I actually learned was Bengali just because both my parents spoke that in the house. And I was like, I absolutely love dressing up. I love food. I love all the holidays and things we celebrate. I was like, you can't expect me to just throw that away over a man when I actually enjoy these aspects. And I was like, it's not going to happen. I was like, you see what kind of person I am. Of course, like, I love my British side, my education, all the things I get to experience here. But at the end of the day, I am a Bengali. That will always be the case. And I think the more I told her, I was like, it's just not going to go away. I was like, trust me, if I'd have lost it, I'd have lost it by now because I live in England. It would have happened. And I think for her, that was kind of, what something got a bit turned. She's like, yeah, that's true. My daughter is British. She was born and raised here. If she was going to become very westernized by now, she would have. And
Yeah.
after I say probably now maybe 6 months, she got very much round to the idea and Matthew converted at that point prior to our marriage. But even after he converted, I knew it was definitely because she still kept bringing it up. She's like, oh, I'm not sure if he doesn't speak Bengali, why can't I was like, Mom, we're not going to be living with you. That's the reality of the fact. So when you do see him, you're going to
Mm.
be able to speak to him because it's not like you can't speak English or understand it. And I think a lot of Bengali parents are often nervous that they won't be able to communicate with their,
Yeah.
children. And I understand that fear. But I think they also kind of discredit themselves because they've lived here for sometimes decades. So they do understand it. But I think it's just that innate fear, isn't it?
100%. And it's that inner fear that they can't probably connect with their daman, the son-in-law, if they can't speak English. And I remember my mum spent a whole year just disliking my brother-in-law. And my brother-in-law, and this is God's honest truth, every time he came to their house, he would come bearing with gifts, flowers. He can't speak the language at all, but he tried to make an effort to call my mom Ammaji. He'll call her Hammaji. We will laugh. He eats with his hand when he comes here. And every time he comes here, he always asks my mom for lamb curry. So now it's become his thing. And it's crazy because now my mom is the one that asks for my brother in law first thing every day. How is my son-in-law doing? She'll be the first one waking up at 6 o'clock to making sure there's a lamb curry. It annoys some of us sometimes at home, but they do eventually get around to it. What was your most challenging point in your life when it came to your mom maybe having that relationship with your husband and having a good platonic loving relationship as well?
I think the interesting part in my situation is after we got married, I'll be honest with you, my mother loved him like her own. Like she
So
accepted him straight away. She's like, this is my son now.
yeah.
And I think the difficult part more so was prior to that, she had so many kind of going backward and forward that without even intending to, it affected the future relationship. It's almost like, if they're acting like this now, how can I expect them to be once we're all married in one family? So I think I was worried by her kind of acceptance, then declining of him. What if he acts and he resents her, or what if, she isn't too halfway through our marriage? And it gave me more so, I think, a lot of paranoia because she could not make up her mind. I was really worried that was going to affect the relationship.
Oh, that is amazing. I mean, sometimes we're very blessed that it goes very smoothly, and sometimes we really have to probably, I'm sure there's a lot of stories out there where females and men have to work really hard to impress their parents and get their head around to saying, look, this is who I'm going to marry. And I think that leads for me to actually ask you as well, like our generation, and you're a bit younger, the young generation, my age generation, we are in this how do I say it, it's this, we have this Western culture and the Eastern culture. We try to adopt as much as we can and keep the Bengali culture alive and the religion aspect, the identity part of it, and yet we have to live for ourselves and be like, okay, times are changing, times are moving on, we have to embrace more here, and it's not just restricted to being married within the culture. We have to invite people. Islam allows us to marry people outside of our cultures, and this is where the confusing part is. And the wires get crossed a lot. So educating our elder parents is probably very important. Did you find at any point then with your mom and even maybe your extended family members explaining to them about this Islamic aspect of the thing, of marrying outside the culture?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when my mom constantly brought up the argument of him not being Bengali, I was like, but mom, Islam literally allows this to occur. In fact, we are encouraged to do so, like the Prophet, peace be upon him. He married women specifically who were widowed, divorced from other tribes, so that people knew this was okay, this wasn't a bad thing, we don't need to avoid it. In fact, it should be something good for us because it mixes people and makes them more united. And that argument was often brought up to the point, sometimes I put on, you say khutbas from like a sheikh, just so that she gets a deeper understanding in Bengali. Because obviously my Bengali isn't the greatest, so maybe a sheikh's kind of Bengali would be attuned to her. So that conversation was brought up a lot. And at one point, one of my cousins, I also said to him, I was like, at the end of the day, this man is free, but Islamically, this is allowed in every single way. And he was just like, yes, aunt, you have to listen. It's Islamically allowed. Unless you have a valid reason, you can't particularly reject this.
So it's
That's
funny
the
because
truth.
no, thank you so much for sharing that. I really find the extended family is probably harder to actually impress than your immediate siblings, your parents, or anything. Uh, but they have to get around to it eventually, I guess. How do you think then the Bangladeshi community, maybe in your area or the community as in your relatives as a whole, how did they actually receive your husband at the time when you brought him home? Was it negative? Was it positive? Or was it like, oh, okay, whatever?
I think in my situation, mine's only my mother's side of the family, really. And that made it more difficult because they're like, oh, she's a divorcee. She probably needs someone else to help her with better judgment, almost, you could say. And
Okay.
it bothered me. And I was just like, I think I understand your skepticism because this isn't a commonality in our family. But at the end of the day, I think you should have enough respect for me as a human being to know I can make a decent decision in a partner, both Islamically and culturally. And
Yeah.
in the end, they will know I'm quite headstrong. Like if I want something, I will go and get it. And unless their opinion is genuinely valid, I won't really entertain it in the sense of, oh, he doesn't know the language. Like, but that's not really a
Yeah.
massive problem, is it? 'Cause we can speak to each other. So for me, yeah, I think once we were married and they actually met him, they absolutely loved him. And I think I'm convinced my mum likes him more than me at this point because they all loved him so much and it was beautiful. I
I
just
love
thought kerfuffle for nothing because they end up liking him more than me.
I mean, what would be your number one advice? And we can give the best advice from experience because I'm sure there are hundreds of young females in like your situation where they want to bring somebody who's not within their own culture, outside of their culture, who may not be Muslim, who may be a totally different kind of tribe. What would be your number one advice making it work in terms of marriage and then the whole revert to Islam as well? How would you explain to somebody what steps to take?
I think number one would probably be as kind of confidently honest as you can because I know it's very easy to be nervous, but being confident and honest with your parents, I think almost immediately builds some sort of trust, whatever level you want to call it. And I think secondly, always bring up the Islamic argument because they cannot deny that as much as they want to be headstrong, they cannot say no to the Islamic argument. And I think that if possible, either get a sibling or some extended family member on your side to also advocate for you because that is a major step. Because if it's just you alone, it does get more difficult. But if you do have like a cousin or a sibling who's like, yeah, this is fine, it will work, and they also try to smooth things over, it does definitely help. But you have to be consistent. Sometimes it can take years, sometimes it can take months, but persistence and trying to be as calm as possible is absolutely key.
Wow. I'm going to remember those advice. I need to write this down as well. I think, I mean, it is a task as a female when you're taking on somebody who's not in the religion. You are now their leader almost. You're now guiding them. And I'm not saying because we are born Muslims, we know it all. Sometimes, from my experience of seeing friends, they actually know more about the religion more than I do as a born Muslim, which is quite shameful, really, because they take an active challenge and a task to learn more about it. It's more exciting for them, right? So, as a woman as well, if you are a woman going into an interracial marriage, I guess we are at the forefront of creating that and making sure that the teachings of Islam is done in a beautiful, comforting way where it doesn't feel like we're shoving it down their throats, right?
Yeah, big time.
In your experience, how did two questions in one? First of all, in your experience, how did you teach him about Islam? And then how was his reversion process like? Experiences for him and for yourself?
I think in terms of teaching him about Islam, I think the most important thing is letting him, for the most part, approach me with the questions. If you just go in nearly every other day saying, "Hey, do you have any questions? Hey, what do you want to know?" It gets a bit like, "Oh God, stop hounding me." I need to actually take the time to learn something, to have a question about it. I think a lot of people forget you need to learn to question. And then also, once they do question, be patient about it because some people will try and refute you, and that's absolutely natural. People should question things like that. Islam encourages us to question so we learn deeper. So don't be offended if they question your religion. It's not coming from a place of malice for the most part. They just want to understand. So being patient and listening to the question fully, and also remembering that then they might not get it the first go. You might have to repeat it to them twice, 10 times, 20 times. And every single time you need to be just as gentle as the Prophet, peace be upon him, was when he taught about Islam. And I think his reversion process, I think it was quite simple in the sense of my cousin, he knew one of the sheikhs at the East London Mosque. And we were just like, oh, would you be happy to speak with him regarding this? And it was quite nice because the sheikh spoke to him alone so that he would have the chance to just ask him what he thinks and get his opinions and just find out what his intentions were. And I think it was really good because we gave him that privacy to speak to someone who's very knowledgeable in the field. And alhamdulillah, they came out, he's like, this man's intentions are pure. We're happy, let's go ahead if he's happy to do it. And alhamdulillah, it was probably one of the most favorite days of my life so far because it was just beaming and everyone was happy, prayed, and it was such a good feeling. And I think overall the process on the day was nice, but it was full of lots of questions, understanding, and some umming. You need to give people time to mull these things over.
Oh, you make my heart so warm, honestly, genuinely. It's so lovely to see that. And I mean, you're quite young in terms of age, but you seem very, very headstrong and you seem full of wisdom. So I'm sure he's a very, very, very lucky guy to have one of my Bengali sisters
Oh,
out here. Well, in your personal yourself as who you are, did you face many challenges when it came to maybe communication, understanding the Bengali culture? Because we are very loud people when we want to be, and we're very passionate people, right?
yeah.
And it's two very different cultures, the English, and then we speak, and it seems like we're shouting
Mhm.
sometimes, you know. And what were your personal challenges then?
I think, like you mentioned, one of the biggest things was the talking loud. Like Matthew himself has a small family, and generally English people, they're not really that loud like the way we are. Then the couple first times when he was around and everyone was there, he was just like, "Oh my, this is really loud." And I think he was a bit curious, is this an argument? Because obviously he doesn't understand Bengali, so he's not really sure what's happening. But I was like,
Mm.
no, this is completely normal. We always shout at each other. This is very normal. This means we're happy, if anything. And obviously, if he's speaking to my mother, sometimes I'll translate for him. I think that's probably the most kind of challenging part is if I'm having a conversation with my mum, it's like I have to translate for her what he's saying and I have to translate for him what she's saying. And it's kind of like this tripartite of translation that's going on. I'm the middle person. But it never really was a bother to me. It was more so because, you know, Bengali is how we are. We have like five people in one room, five different conversations. And it's like,
Yeah.
I just want to ensure he doesn't feel isolated. And I think if you do have a partner who doesn't speak the language and you can see they're kind of sitting there looking around, just have a conversation with them yourself. Don't allow them to feel left out. That's the most important thing. And then engage in one
Oh,
conversation at a time.
that is so wonderful. Luckily, my brother-in-law, they're Colombian, right? So they speak Spanish. So at the
Mhm.
wedding, we had a Spanish side and we had the Bengali side, all just talking in their own languages. And sometimes I look back and I think it's so beautiful, like two cultures come together. You're
Mm.
eating Colombian food, you're eating Bangladeshi food. When Eid is upon us and two times a year, Ramadan comes, we get the best of both worlds sometimes. And I know for a fact, I mean, English culture, English food, we grew up on all of this, whether it's pizza,
Mhm.
whether it's fish and chips. It's not really anything amusing for us as
Mm.
maybe a cultural person, a South Asian person. Was it hard for him as an English guy then to come into your culture, into the Bangladeshi family with food, with culture, with the language, religion, anything like that?
I think if we're talking about food for Matthew, that was literally never a problem. Most of his friends growing up were like Pakistani or Kashmiri, so he would
Yeah,
regularly be eating out with them, and he could always tolerate the highest spice I went. And to be honest, I'm very impressed with him. And so in that sense, the food was never an issue for him. He's just like, oh yes, I love this food, so I'll take as much as I can. But I think probably maybe some of the cultural things were a bit more difficult to kind of grasp. I think one of the biggest things, whether or not we like to admit, is a lot of Bengali culture is sexist. So it's like if a woman says certain things, often it's just like, well, you know, we'd rather hear what the men have to say. And I think for him that was extremely like, oh God, that's a bit weird. I don't really understand why that's a thing. And I think another thing was he didn't understand why sometimes Bengalis marry based on name or village. And he was just like, you don't live there, so how does that really affect you in this country? And I think that's genuinely good question because in a sense, it's like, yeah, what does a name actually have an impact on someone's marriage if you really think about it? And the
yeah,
sexism, yeah, that's always bothered me personally, and I've always been a bit of a brash one when it comes to that, and it's probably got me in trouble. But I think for him, those are probably the main things. But it was never like a big deal in the sense of, oh my God, this is a complete shock to me because he's grown up, like I said, around some people who are Pakistani Kashmiri, so he had an idea. But I think obviously once you're really thrust into the culture, it is obviously a culture shock for that person. But I think Alhamdulillah, Matthew dealt with it really well and he just kept asking questions when he had them and he kept, you know, doing his most to listen and whatnot. And I think it also went the same for me really, because as much as I've grown up here, I've always grown up around Bengali or Pakistani people. I haven't actually been around white people for the most part, if that really makes sense.
yeah. I mean, Matthew's a soldier.
Yeah, it's not easy to get into Bengali culture, so I waited for it.
You know what I find fascinating is watching. non-Bengalis, non-Asians actually taking an active engaging with the culture, with like eating hands, even wearing the outfits or
Yeah.
trying to speak the language. It's actually so cute at the same
I
time.
know, really sweet. It's like quite admirable, you know, they're actually genuinely going out of the way to do it when in reality they don't actually have to. So it's like, you know, they appreciate it, and I appreciate that as well.
Oh, bless. Moving on then, thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this topic because this is something we talk about in everyday conversations, I guess. And everyday conversations are the things that we need to discuss because that breaks down the barriers and some of the stigma that we hold around certain topics. And interracial marriage over the years has had different, how do I say, insight in various ways from different people. Why do you think interracial marriages still has a certain taboo and stigma around it?
To be honest, I think if we go back kind of like historically, I think colonialism absolutely has a part to play with it. Because if you think about it, when the colonizers came over, they portrayed this kind of thing of being with your own race is the right way to be, because that's what was kind of given to them as fact. And unfortunately, some were forced to or end up taking on the ideology. And that kind of goes back down to Bengalis being with Bengalis, because that's what became the norm. I think also some of it you could put it down to royalty. If you look at royalty, oftentimes they marry within their family name. So I think that's also another factor. And you know, Bangladesh is a country which is extremely proud of its culture. It's a country that has to fight for recognition. So I completely understand wanting to preserve that kind of culture, tradition, language, and all that stuff. So I think those historical things majorly play into it. And I think obviously if you live in a country is surrounded by one specific people, it becomes the norm to marry into that. So to do otherwise is very strange. So I think those are probably the main factors.
You explained that so beautifully, right? I mean, I was thinking it at the back of my head, but I couldn't articulate it properly. I just want to, we had somebody texting in. I'm going to quickly just read this out. A comment from a sister. Thank you so much for writing in, by the way. And she said, this is such an important topic of conversation. You're both so lovely and great at explaining, and it's nice to see two intelligent, strong Muslim females on screen. Thank you so much. And if you guys have any questions, please text in on 079 507 797 and we are live on Sky channel 752, and we would welcome your questions. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, please get in touch with us. I'm speaking to Fahima and we're speaking about interracial marriages. So really appreciate this message. That means people are listening, people are tuned in. In terms of going back to this taboo and this stigma, and the way you beautifully articulated this, do you think in our generation now then we still hold the same type of taboo and stigma, or is it different types of taboo and stigma? And no, first answer that question, then I'll ask you the second one.
I think possibly for our generation, the taboo and stigma has slightly evolved. I think it's more so there's this kind of trend of people saying people want to lose their culture when they want to be white. I think a lot of people try to detract from your marriage and from your love and try and base it off solely in ethnicity and say, oh, if you don't marry a Bengali, you are not proud of your heritage, you are not proud of your culture, and you just want to become a white person. You know, you're whitewashed. That's the argument these days I find most often. So I think that's probably the change. And I think also a lot of it does still also stick to tradition. It's like people are like, oh, you're going to lose out all the things you learned as a child and your kid's not going to speak Bengali. That's another argument.
You know what's really fascinating in our Bengali culture, we don't even know our or Aroshi, Durge or Bengali texts, right? More so with the younger generation. So I find it very fascinating when people say you're going to lose your culture, right? It's not just one aspect of culture. There's so much. There's so many angles here, right? And then people think if you marry outside of your, first of all, religion, obviously they convert, or you're marrying outside something that's not known to our normality, you become a coconut. I love this
Yeah.
word
Oh
coconut. Have
God,
you ever been called this?
it's
Have
honestly.
you?
I've been called a coconut quite a few times for the sole fact that I have an English husband. Whereas previously, for example, I told someone I went to a university, 99% of my classmates are English, so
Wow.
technically all my friends are English. Never once have I been called a coconut, not once. And I spent hours and years with these people. But the second I'm married to someone who's English, all of a sudden I'm a coconut. And personally, I don't really like that term because a lot of it is kind of rooted in like, kind of you could say casual racism. It's like kind of
Yeah.
saying, oh, it's bad to be this or bad to be that one. It's like, why can't we all just respect each other for who we are?
Wow. See, I like this topic, what you just said there with the counter racism, how it can actually backfire within. We actually, let's just put it out there. I feel like sometimes the South Asian community, as much as we've evolved and this has progressed in acceptance of other people from a different culture, I still feel like sometimes we haven't progressed so much, and there's a bit of push that we need because it does come with a lot of tough challenges in individual households. And most people are not really open about talking about it. Do you think the South Asian community, and I go back and step back as well, when it comes to colorism, when it comes to showcasing beauty, what it means, especially in our Bengali culture, we have this idea that if you're fair, you're shundar. Shundar meaning is you're beautiful. We still have this racism within our own community sometimes, don't you think?
Absolutely. Prior to meeting Matthew, there was someone I was interested in, and I was just told flat out, my parents will say no to you because you're dark. Flat out, I was
Wow.
just told that. There is
Mm.
an astonishing amount of colorism within our culture. And again, this links back to colonialism and colonizers came over saying white features and white color is the preferred look. So your features are technically, below us. We're the superior. That's where it comes from. So oftentimes when we as Bengali say, oh, you're not fair enough, that's not coming from Bengali people, that came from white people. So the
Yeah.
fact that we accept this either through choice or through force, I think it's actually really sad because it's technically you're just hating your own people. Let's be honest, majority of Bengali people are going to be tanned. We live very much close to the equator, so it's going to happen. So I don't know why we put such an emphasis on fair skin color, when in reality you're more affected by sun damage. So I don't really understand what this argument is all about. You need to be fair to be valuable because it literally holds no weight scientifically, or even you could say morally.
100%. I mean, earlier last year, when the Black Lives Movement happened, there was a big uproar. This topic was very, very hot in the South Asian community about being racist to Black people and that kind of interracial marriage. And I think we still have some work to do, if not a lot of work to do. And in a nutshell, like maybe white people in the Bangladeshi community are more accepted compared to our Black brothers who still are facing so much racial struggles and everything. And the key word I think I'm looking for here is breaking those barriers from all the cultures and to say, okay, no culture is better than the other one. We just have to embrace one another and just move on and live in unity and solidarity and just embrace the differences. Because differences make life so much more colorful, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's like a painting. You have every single color available. That's what we should be looking for. Because, again, I think with the whole Bangladeshis being more specifically, you could say racist to Black people more than white people. Again, that comes from, when the Brits came over, it was during the transatlantic slave trade. So they were kind of putting a color scale. Fairest, which
Yeah,
is the white people, we are the best. Middle is you, so you're less than us, but you're not as bad as the Black people. And
yeah.
unfortunately, that's stuck in our culture. And I think it's actually absolutely a shambles because some Bengali people are on the same scale as a Black person. So it's ridiculous. Like you could consider me a light-skinned Black person with my skin color. And a lot of people often mistake me Somali, but for some reason we think that's somehow an insult. I
You
don't
are
know.
so gorgeous. I'm actually quite jealous of your beautiful golden brown skin at the moment. Okay.
Thank you.
Mashallah. In my house, there's we're like the six brothers and sisters, and three of us are dark and three of us are very fair. And growing up, and the girls faced it a lot. Some of my sisters, if you're dark, you're not seen as pretty, and if you're fair,
Yeah.
the uncles like you more. It's shambolic, shambolic.
It's embarrassing, honestly. It's just so shallow, isn't it?
100%. And I mean, let's go outside of just not just thinking about Islam as well. I've got my best friend is Hindu. Even colorism exists in there, interracial marriages on a wider aspect of the South Asian community is something as a hot topic, a stigma, a taboo. And hopefully, as times go by, I'm praying that, we become, I'm praying that it doesn't become a topic we need to discuss, to actually say, you know what, this needs to be addressed. It just needs to become normalized, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know how South Asian people as a whole, like, unfortunately, have become so engrossed in skin color when what we need to be looking for is someone's character, someone's,
Yeah.
faith and how it works with us and compatibility. And, I've got a lot of Pakistani friends, Indian friends who have told me the exact same thing. If they're dark, they're kind of looked down on, and if you're the fair one, you're favored. And it kind of almost creates sibling rivalry as well, because if you have a fair sibling, naturally they get better attention than you, and it makes you feel terrible about yourself.
100%. And I work with a lot of females that actually tell me about how they get rejected down to their skin color. And this is actually
Yeah.
a very, very important thing I need to actually address. In our community, we reject females more because of the colors and being fair, because whatever it is. And then when females are tired of being rejected in their own communities, whether it's Bangladeshi communities or not, all of a sudden it
Mm.
becomes a hindrance if they now look outside of their culture. And people need to first understand, if you're not accepting and actually working with what needs to be worked on in our communities first, then we're going to lose a lot of people, and they're not going to be able to feel connected again to the culture, to learn or Aroshi, So it is our job, it is our job in a way to make sure first we educate and then we integrate people into our own in our own tribes, isn't it?
Yeah, literally. I think, you can't be surprised if you exclude someone within your community and make them feel like an outsider for the sole purpose of existing. Of course, naturally, they're going to look elsewhere. Like, I got rejected for having a disability, for being dark, for my height, or, so many various things. Even the fact that my parents are divorced, somehow that was a bad reflection on me. So I think, as a Bengali community, if we are surprised that people look elsewhere intentionally or not, that's probably a deeper reflection of the community and how we are treating those individuals.
Wow. I mean, it's getting very serious here. So I love it. I love it. Honestly, honestly. I mean, we can be here hours talking about this, honestly, and figuring out how do we create this big noise about just saying enough is enough. But my next question to you is, when you're out and about, do you get people staring at you from the white community, maybe, or even from the Bangladeshi community, or generally people?
Yep, we get it from both. I've had Asian people, like literally one time, I was in crutches. I had foot surgery, and I think it was a Bengali lady. She saw me and she was with her little son, and she shouted, she's like, disgusting. She's got a white boyfriend. And she stood on my newly operated foot, and it snapped the bone and the screw inside. And that was just her pure hatred for the fact that I was with someone who's not Bengali. And she didn't
Wow.
even know if he was married. She didn't know if he was Muslim. She just judged. She's with a white guy, bad girl. That was the instant assumption. And we've had the same from, white people as well. Sometimes they've looked at us and just kind of been like, this is a bit weird. And sometimes, you can tell when someone is kind of like, oh, he can't be the Muslim one. She's the only Muslim one. You can blatantly feel it. They're just kind of like, either he's a traitor or she's kind of trying to become more British, and you get all these ridiculous amounts of judgments. And I'm like, you wouldn't think twice if my husband was just tanned or if I didn't wear a scarf. You literally probably would not think twice. And I think it's absolutely remarkable because I'd say probably 9 out of 10 times it's a negative judgment, and it's typically from people who are above my age. So I'd say probably 35, 40 plus. And people who are more my age group, they often smile.
Wow, wow. I'm so sorry that you have to face any of that stuff, but thank you for sharing something that's so vulnerable as well. Do you do you respond to any of that stuff?
I think if, for example, I can tell someone is South Asian and they're clearly Muslim, I will just say to them, I'm like, it's not haram, get over it. It's following the Prophet and peace be upon him. So if you don't like it, take it up with Islam, not me. And if it's someone who is like English, for example, someone I'm not sure of their religion, I will just do something to rub it in their face. I'll just give my husband a kiss, and it just annoys them. And I'm like, what are you going to do realistically? You can't do nothing, and you can't be responsible for being the spokesperson for your community, for your religion all the time. It's exhausting. So if you want to just rub it in a little bit and let them know that you cannot stop something just because of your prejudices, here you go. Here it is in your face.
I really rate you, honestly, Fahima, because it takes a different kind of strength to not react all the time to situation. It's very easy to just shout back and voice your opinion, basically, and trying to make people understand. It can be exhausting sometimes, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Because it is almost the expectation that you have to constantly debate your relationship and explain the validity of it. And it's like, dude, I just want to go to the restaurant and eat a pizza with my husband. That's what I'm trying to do. I don't need to have a debate on the way.
You know what's really fascinating? I want to quickly go back. You said something. So if I was to be dating somebody that's white without the hijab, right? And then you wearing the hijab and then being with a revert white guy, do you think we will both have two different kind of reactions from people or the same?
I think there will be probably a slight difference. I think maybe some people who aren't Muslim or who aren't Bengali would just assume you're not Muslim. They'll probably think, oh, she might be like a Christian Indian person or perhaps a Hindu person. Because I think that's generally what a lot of people do think if you don't wear a hijab. And that in itself still gets a lot of negative stereotypes because they're just like, you're a traitor to your country. And it's just
Wow.
ridiculous. And then for me, if I do it, they're like, oh, he clearly isn't Muslim, which is just strange. Because I'm like, why would you assume that as if Muslims come in a specific skin color when they don't? It's not an ethnicity, it's a religion.
It's a very, I mean, I asked a very risky question, but I mean, as a hijabi, the current state of things that are going on at the world with hijabis as well, it's important to see where you stand with that and how you feel as well. And 100% I agree with you, I'm sure. A non-hijabi and a hijabi will get different reactions. And then this whole thing you also said before, maybe, I think, quote me if I'm wrong, she's a bad girl because she's not within
Yeah,
her own culture, being kharaf. Kharaf means the
yeah.
wrong way. Yeah. Translating my Bengali here for you. How do you deal with that? How do you overcome with that on a day-to-day basis if it comes to you?
I think for the most part, I try to inform people that comes from a place of, I'd say more so sexism. Because, for example, if a Bengali man were to be with a white girl, no one would question his modesty. No one would be like, oh my God, he went out of his way to find someone without his parents' permission. But when it's a woman, people seem to go out the way and say, you're immodest because you clearly found him before marriage. And it's like, the Islamic right for a woman is to choose her spouse. Whether or not you like the color of them, the ethnicity, that is my right. And it's not a problem of whether my parents need to formally approach me and say, are you looking? Do you want to look? I can also do that on my accord. You can be like within the Islamic parameters and look for someone. It's not really that much of a crime to do something like that. And I think people need to be more mindful that it's not going to make someone a bad girl for doing that. And I don't know why we specifically pick on girls more for it when in reality, Islam gives us the right to look for a spouse on our terms.
You're bringing out all the cards here right now, okay? And I'm like short on time. I'm like selective of what question do I ask next? But it is very important to actually bring this to the table, what you just said there. If a Muslim man was to date a Muslim revert, it's more seen as, mashallah, brother, you brought a sister to the deen, right? But then
Yep,
if a sister
yep,
marries that side, she's seen in a
yep,
whole different kind of light.
yeah.
And it's something I guess females are forever working hard and battling
Constantly,
being accepted.
constantly. It's like for some reason the Bengali man is seen as a savior when in reality you can't make anyone convert. That's something Allah gives you or He doesn't give you. And oftentimes, sometimes people will say to me, "Oh, you converted him." I'm like, I did not do that. My husband is his own person. He can choose for himself what he wants to do. But it's so often like I'm the bad girl and the guy is a savior, and it's just a ridiculous kind of assumption because you don't know that the revert girl might actually be more beneficial for him than he is for her.
Fascinating, fascinating. Fahima, I'm going to wrap up with one last question for you. We're nearly at the end of the show. What have you learned from being with somebody from a different culture, different race then? Your most valuable lesson here?
I think people often see interracial marriages as, you're leaving your culture and you're forgetting things behind. But from what I've learned, if anything, it gives you far more culture than you will ever lose. Like, for example, my whole life I've been a Bengali, that's what I've been raised as, and I absolutely love that. But by being with my husband and seeing his family, I have learned so much more about English culture, English history, and that is not a bad thing. We should never discredit someone for learning about another country's history, for learning about another country's cultures, and at the same time being able to preserve your own. I feel like people always make it this ultimatum when it doesn't have to be. I think the most beautiful thing is I learned so much more about both.
Wow, thank you so much. I really, really honor your words, truly.
Oh,
And I just want to say thank you for just being so open because sometimes it's not easy. Thank you also to everybody who's joined us. Thank you to my guest, Fahima Bassett. It has been a pleasure having you on today's show. If you have any questions which you would like to put forward for next week's show, please do message us in confidence on WhatsApp 07950797017. Follow me, Nazia Khatun, along with the whole team at British Muslim TV. Thank you for joining us. Assalamu alaikum. I've got 2 minutes, guys. I can actually still continue. I just want to put last 2 pence here. What you just said there in the last bit, personally, from my experience as well, I never integrated with the English culture. I just took it for granted. And with everything that's going on in the world, it's been an insight learning about the Colombian, the English, and understanding my place in England as well. Do you feel like sometimes you get cross-wired between the two at any time?
I think that's actually quite a good question. It's like sometimes you're like, am I more English? Am I more Bangladeshi? What on earth am I? But I think I probably found quite a comfortable middle ground in the sense of when I got married to Matthew, it actually almost became, I don't know why it happened, for some reason, I got far more interested in Bangladesh's history because Matthew would often explain to me in World War II, we had a lot of people come over from India, South Asia to help out with the war. And I was like, oh, I didn't even actually know that. You've taught me something about my culture that I had no idea. And that kind of pushed me to learn. So if anything, I feel more linked to both. It's a really strange one, but at times I find myself learning more about Bangladeshis one day and more about, my birth country's history. It's so like uniquely interesting.
You learn something every single day about your own self, about everything and that's going on in terms of how you guys work together, how you work as your own person as well. Honestly, Fahima, I've learned so much from you, and I've learned so much from my sister, from her relationship and how they've grown and bonded together. We are now coming to the end of our show, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com. Thank you so much. And Alhamdulillah, it's been a really brilliant show. If you guys have any questions, please make sure you do WhatsApp us on 0795079717. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and make sure you tune in next week. And we will see you then. Assalamu alaikum.
With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.